The moment you stop being available, some people become uncomfortable. Not because you became cruel, not because you stopped caring, but because something changed that they were secretly depending on. You no longer answer instantly. You no longer explain yourself endlessly. You no longer absorb their chaos. And suddenly, your peace feels like an attack. Carl Jung understood that most relationships are not as conscious as people pretend. Many connections are built on hidden emotional roles. One person gives, one person takes, one person apologizes, one person controls the mood, one person keeps the peace by betraying themselves. And the relationship survives, not because it is healthy, but because everyone keeps playing their assigned part. This is why toxic people often do not react strongly when you are suffering. Your suffering is familiar to them. It keeps you predictable, reachable, and emotionally available. But your distance is different. Distance interrupts the pattern. Distance says, without words, I am no longer willing to be used in the same way. And that is what truly unsettles them. There is a version of you that certain people become attached to. Not the real you, but the useful you, the forgiving you, the patient you, the one who explains after being misunderstood, the one who stays calm while being disrespected, the one who keeps giving access because they are afraid of being seen as cold. That version of you becomes convenient. And convenience is often mistaken for love. Some people do not love your soul. They love your availability. They love how easy it is to reach you, influence you, guilt you, and pull you back into their emotional world. They love the version of you that has no boundaries, because that version requires nothing from them except continued access. Jung spoke about the shadow, the hidden part of the personality that people refuse to face. In toxic relationships, the shadow often hides behind emotional dependency. A person may not admit they need control. They may not admit they fear abandonment. They may not admit they use guilt to stay powerful. Instead, they call it love, concern, loyalty, or pain. But when you pull away, their shadow begins to surface. The calm mask starts cracking. Suddenly they accuse you of changing. They say you are acting different. They say you are cold, distant, arrogant, selfish, or ungrateful. But very often, what they call your cruelty is simply your refusal to keep abandoning yourself for their comfort. This is one of the clearest signs of an unhealthy dynamic. People become more upset by your boundaries than they ever were by your pain. They had no urgency when you were exhausted. They had no deep concern when you were drained. But when your access becomes limited, when your replies become slower, when your energy returns to you, they suddenly become emotional. That reaction tells you something important. They were not only connected to you, they were regulated by you. Your attention helped them avoid their emptiness. Your forgiveness helped them avoid accountability. Your patience helped them avoid change. As long as you stayed emotionally available, they could continue avoiding themselves. This is why your healing may feel like betrayal to people who benefited from your wounds. The insecure version of you was easier to manage. The anxious version was easier to guilt. The people-pleasing version was easier to control. But once you begin to trust yourself, once you stop over-explaining, once you stop begging to be understood, the old arrangement begins to collapse. A toxic person may not even realize how much they depended on your lack of boundaries. Human beings adapt quickly to emotional convenience. If you always say yes, your no feels aggressive. If you always answer quickly, your silence feels disrespectful. If you always tolerate mistreatment, your self-respect feels like rejection. But nothing became wrong. Access simply changed. And when access changes, manipulation often changes form. It may not look like shouting or obvious control. It can appear as guilt, nostalgia, victimhood, confusion, or sudden tenderness. They remind you of the past. They say they miss the old you. They act wounded by the very boundaries that only became necessary because they ignored your limits for too long. This is where many people collapse emotionally, not because they want to go back, but because they feel guilty for becoming free. They wonder if they are being too harsh. They wonder if protecting themselves makes them cruel. They wonder if love means staying available, even when availability keeps destroying them. But guilt is not always a sign that you are wrong. Sometimes guilt is simply the sound of an old pattern dying. If you were trained to survive by pleasing others, then choosing yourself will feel uncomfortable at first. Your nervous system may confuse peace with danger because chaos is what it knows. You may feel tempted to explain, return, soften, apologize, or reopen a door that your soul already knows should remain closed. Jung believed that what remains unconscious controls us. In relationships, this means that the patterns we do not examine will keep repeating. You may keep attracting people who need your empathy, but do not respect your boundaries. You may keep confusing being needed with being loved. You may keep mistaking emotional intensity for intimacy. But awareness changes everything. The moment you see the pattern, you can no longer fully unsee it. You notice who only appears when they need something. You notice who becomes warm only when you pull away. You notice who apologizes without changing. You notice who calls you sensitive when you react to wounds they keep reopening. This awareness creates distance naturally. Not dramatic distance, not revenge, not hatred, just a quiet inner separation. Something inside you stops reaching for the same people in the same way. You may still care, but the attachment begins to weaken. You may still understand them, but understanding no longer feels like a reason to remain available for harm. This is the difference between bitterness and clarity. Bitterness says, everyone is dangerous. Clarity says, not everyone deserves access to me. Bitterness closes the heart completely. Clarity teaches the heart to recognize patterns. Bitterness is pain that has lost direction. Clarity is pain that has become wisdom. Toxic people panic when you pull away because your distance forces them to face what your presence used to hide. Without your constant attention, they feel their own emptiness. Without your patience, they feel their own instability. Without your silence, they hear the truth more clearly. Your absence becomes a mirror, and many people hate mirrors. But your job is not to keep people comfortable inside their own unconsciousness. Your job is not to be endlessly available so others never have to grow. Your job is not to keep shrinking so someone else can feel powerful. Love does not require self-erasure. Compassion does not require unlimited access. Forgiveness does not require returning to the same cage. There comes a moment when peace matters more than being understood. When you stop trying to prove your heart to people committed to misunderstanding it. When you stop arguing with projections. When you stop defending boundaries to people who only respected you when you had none. That moment may feel lonely, but it is also the beginning of freedom. So when toxic people panic because you pull away, do not rush to fix their discomfort. Their reaction may reveal exactly why distance was necessary. You are not responsible for maintaining a version of yourself that kept you wounded, drained, and easy to control. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is become unavailable to the patterns that once owned you.